My name is Rowan Hayes, and I am 28 years old. For the last 5 years, my world has been confined to the 4 walls of this house, caring for my ailing grandmother. Tonight, however, this house became a courtroom, and my father, the self-appointed judge, had just passed his sentence. But he had no idea that I held a secret, a final gift from my grandmother, that was about to overturn his entire verdict. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the suffocating silence of his study, I won't be leaving. But you will be. The party, my father's 60th birthday, was in full swing outside. The sound of laughter and music drifted through the closed study door, a cruel soundtrack to the moment my life was being dismantled. My father, Mark, stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of stern disappointment. My mother, Susan, stood beside him, wringing her hands, a silent accomplice. And my older brother, Caleb, the golden child, leaned against the wall with a smug, satisfied smirk. They had cornered me, their faces lit by the warm glow of the desk lamp, to deliver their verdict. Rowan, you're 28 years old, my father began, his tone leaving no room for discussion. You're living here, rent-free, with no real job. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet. Your mother and I have decided. You have 24 hours to pack your things and leave. My mother chimed in, her voice soft but laced with steel. Caleb needs your room for a proper home office, honey. He just got that big promotion. It's for the best. For everyone. For everyone but me. The words hung in the air, a cold, hard slap of ingratitude. What would you do if your own family treated your sacrifice like a burden? 5 years. I gave them 5 years of my life. I was halfway through my master's degree in architecture when my grandmother, Evelyn, had her stroke. My parents were too busy with their social lives, and Caleb was too focused on his career to care for her. So I dropped out. I came home. I learned to administer medication, to help her bathe, to sit with her through long, painful nights. I held her hand 6 months ago as she took her last breath in this very house. And now, her memory was being disrespected, my sacrifice erased. They saw me not as the granddaughter who had given up everything, but as a freeloader who had overstayed her welcome. They had used me up, and now they were throwing me away like trash. Caleb pushed himself off the wall. Don't be so dramatic, Rowan, he said, that familiar sneer in his voice. We're doing you a favor. It's time to grow up and face the real world. The real world? I had been living in the realest world there was, a world of love, loss, and selfless duty. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg. It's what I had always done, quietly accepting my role as the family's second-class citizen. But my grandmother had seen their true natures long before I had. She had known this day would come. A strange calm washed over me, a quiet strength I didn't know I possessed. I ignored their shocked faces, walked to the grand antique desk in the corner of the study, and pulled a small, ornate key from my pocket. It was the key my grandmother had pressed into my palm the week before she passed. I used the key to unlock the bottom right drawer, a drawer that had been locked for as long as I could remember. Inside was a thick, sealed manila envelope. My father's face went pale. What is this? What are you doing? He stammered, his authority beginning to crumble. I didn't answer. I broke the seal and pulled out a legal document, the last will and testament of Evelyn May Hayes. My parents and brother stared at it as if it were a bomb, which, in a way, it was. I cleared my throat and read the single most important paragraph aloud, my voice clear and steady. I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including the property located at 128 Oak Street, and all assets contained within, to my granddaughter Rowan Hayes, on the sole condition that she makes it her primary residence. I looked up, letting the words sink into their horrified minds. This document was signed and notarized 1 year ago. My grandmother knew you would do this. Their faces were a symphony of shock and disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Caleb's smug smirk had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. My father looked as if he had been physically struck. The power in the room had shifted completely, like a sudden violent earthquake. They weren't in charge anymore. I was. The dutiful daughter, the quiet caregiver, was now their landlord. I folded the document carefully and placed it back in the envelope. So, as you can see, I can't leave. The terms of the will are very specific, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. I then looked each of them in the eye, savoring the panic that was dawning on their faces. So let's amend your little ultimatum, shall we? I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. You have 24 hours to pack your bags and get out of my house. The story of how they react and what secrets this will uncovers is something you won't want to miss. We're just getting started. If you want to see this ultimate revenge play out, make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. What happens next will shock you. The silence in the study was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It lasted for 10 seconds, and then, as I knew he would, my father exploded. The shock on his face curdled into a dark, ugly rage. A forgery, he roared, his voice shaking the old books on the shelves. This is a pathetic joke. You forged a will to try and steal our home. He lunged forward, his hand reaching to snatch the document from me. He still saw me as a little girl he could scare into submission. But that little girl was gone, and the woman who stood in her place didn't even flinch. I held the will tightly, pulling it back out of his reach. My voice was steady, a stark contrast to his trembling rage. It's not a forgery, and you know it. Grandma's lawyer, Mr. Davison, has the original signed copy in his office safe. He's a very respected man in this town. Do you really think he'd risk his entire career to help me with a pathetic joke? I watched the confidence drain from my father's eyes, replaced by a flicker of panic. He had been so sure of his power. He never once considered that I might have a power of my own. My mother, Susan, seeing that anger had failed, tried a different approach. The tears started to flow, her shoulders slumping in a performance of profound sorrow. Rowan, how could you? She sobbed, her voice catching. We're your family. This is your home. After everything we have done for you, to throw us out on the street? Is this what your grandmother would have wanted? For you to destroy our family? It was a masterful guilt trip, a weapon she had used against me my entire life. But the words were hollow now. They had no power over me anymore. My brother Caleb, however, wasn't interested in fake tears or empty threats. His mind, as always, was on the money. Wait a minute, he said, his eyes narrowed with greed. The will said, entire estate. What about her savings? Her investments? Is that all yours too? He wasn't mourning the loss of his home or the fracturing of his family. He was calculating the inheritance he had just lost. It was so disgustingly predictable, and it confirmed every decision my grandmother and I had made. He saw life as a balance sheet, and he had just been moved to the wrong side of the ledger. My mind drifted back to a quiet afternoon last year. I was sitting with Grandma Evelyn on the sun porch, reading to her. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She reached out and took my hand. They see your kindness as a weakness, Rowan, she'd whispered, her grip surprisingly strong. They will take and take until you have nothing left to give. I have watched it your whole life. A tear had rolled down her wrinkled cheek. But not anymore. I will not let that happen. A good heart needs a strong fortress to protect it. It was then that she told me everything. She told me about the will, about the lawyer, and about the key she would leave for me. She was giving me more than a house. She was giving me a shield. When the time comes, she had instructed, her eyes burning with a fierce, protective love, do not be afraid to be strong. Do not let them make you feel guilty for claiming what is rightfully yours. This house is your future, your independence. Don't you ever let them take that from you. Her words were a gift, a final lesson in self-worth. Snapping back to the present, I looked at my mother's tear-streaked face. Her performance was convincing. I had to give her that. It makes me wonder, have you ever had someone in your life who only remembers their family when they need something from you? How do you even respond to that? Tell me what you think in the comments. I looked at her and said, family is supposed to be a safe harbor, Mom. You and Dad turned it into a battle I was never allowed to win. My father, seeing that his anger and my mother's tears had failed, tried one last tactic: fear. You think you can win this, Rowan? He sneered, his confidence returning. I will hire the best lawyer in the state. I will contest this will. We will drag this through the courts for years. We will drain you of every last penny your grandmother left you. You will be left with nothing. It was a classic bully's threat, designed to make me feel small and powerless. But my grandmother had prepared me for this, too. I reached back into the manila envelope and pulled out a second, smaller item. A slim, leather-bound journal. Grandma thought you might say that, I said calmly. For the last 5 years, she wrote in this every single day. She documented every missed doctor's appointment, every holiday you were too busy for, every time you asked me for money from her account. I paused, letting the weight of my next words land. She also documented her conversations with Mr. Davison about her fear that you would try to steal my inheritance. My father stared at the journal in my hand, his face a mess of horror and defeat. It was his greatest fear realized. His private failings, his neglect, all written down, ready to be read aloud in a public courtroom. He was trapped. He was checkmated. I looked up at the grandfather clock in the corner of the study, its slow, steady rhythm filling the silent room. Your 24 hours started 5 minutes ago, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. The clock is ticking. For a full minute, nobody moved. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock, each tick a hammer blow against the foundation of their world. My father, Mark, stared at the journal in my hand, his face a ghastly shade of pale. All the fight had gone out of him, leaving behind the empty shell of a bully who had just met a force he couldn't intimidate. My mother's mask of sorrow had cracked, revealing a cold, hard fury underneath. Caleb just looked stunned, his greedy calculations frozen by this new reality. The party music filtering in from the yard felt like it was from another planet. It was Caleb, ever the pragmatist, who broke the spell. Fine, he snapped, his voice dripping with resentment. But my things are my things. My TV, my gaming consoles, all the furniture I bought for my room. I'm taking all of it. He wasn't pleading for forgiveness or showing a shred of remorse. His first thought was to inventory his assets. He was already mentally packing, separating his life from the family he was so willing to fracture just minutes before. It was the final ugly confirmation that for him, this house was never a home. It was just a free place to store his stuff. I met his bitter gaze without blinking. The old me would have caved, desperate to keep the peace. But my grandmother's strength was flowing through me now. You will take your personal belongings, I stated, my voice calm and final. Your clothes, your electronics, the things you walked in here with. But anything that was a gift from Grandma, or anything that was purchased with her money, which you know includes most of that furniture, stays. This is not a negotiation. I was drawing a line, not just on the floor, but through our entire history. It's a tough spot to be in, isn't it? What do you think is fair in a situation like this? Should they be able to take anything they want? They wordlessly left the study, the fight officially over. The next few hours were the strangest of my life. I watched my family move through the halls like angry ghosts. There was no sad packing of memories, only the furious rustle of garbage bags and the slam of drawers. Each sound was an accusation. I sat on the stairs, an observer in my own life, as they dismantled the illusion of our family. They were just 3 tenants who had been served an eviction notice, and they were angry at their landlord. There was no love here. There was only resentment. My mind went back to a memory from years ago. I was about 16, and I found my grandmother polishing an old silver music box. This was my mother's, she told me, her hands gentle and careful. Everything in this house has a story, Rowan. Some things hold joy. Some hold sorrow. And some Some hold secrets that are best left undisturbed. At the time, I thought she was just being poetic. But now, as I watched my family's true nature reveal itself, I realized she had been giving me a warning. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a silent witness. As the evening bled into a long, dark night, the house began to feel cavernous. The energy had shifted. The weight of their anger was a physical presence in the air. I couldn't stand it anymore. I retreated to my bedroom, the one I had shared with Grandma for the last 6 months of her life, and closed the door. I needed a moment of peace. I sat on the edge of the bed and held her leather-bound journal in my hands. It felt warm, as if it still held a piece of her. This journal wasn't just my defense. It was my inheritance. I opened it to the first page, my heart aching as I saw her elegant, looping handwriting. 4 hours, I read. I relived the last 5 years of my life through her eyes. She had documented everything. Rowan held my hand for 3 hours today while the pain was bad. Mark and Susan called to say they were too busy for their weekly visit. Caleb asked Rowan for $200 for a video game. He said he'd pay her back. He won't. Every page was a testament to my sacrifice and a confirmation of their neglect. It was painful, but it was also a validation that made tears stream down my face. As I got deeper into the journal, I noticed a change. Tucked in the back were older entries, written in a slightly different, shakier hand. It was clear she had added these memories much later, as if she needed to get them out before it was too late. I was about to stop reading for the night when one entry, dated 20 years ago, caught my eye. It was short, cryptic, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. The words seemed to jump off the page, charged with a long-held fear. Mark was in the garage late again last night. It read. He said he was organizing tools, but the smell of bleach was so strong it made my eyes water. He claims he spilled oil, but I saw the dark stains on the concrete before he scrubbed them away. He doesn't know I found the small, muddy shovel hidden behind the old paint cans. I should have told someone. I should have called the police. But I was so afraid for Susan and the children. God, forgive my silence. What stains? What shovel? My blood turned to ice. The foundation of neglect I had always stood on suddenly gave way to a chasm of pure horror. This wasn't just about selfishness. This was about something else entirely, something dark and hidden in the history of this house. Before I could even process the terrifying implications, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, followed by my mother screaming my name in a tone of raw, undiluted panic. Rowan! Get down here! Now! My heart hammered against my ribs as I threw open my bedroom door and ran. The journal entry echoed in my mind, bleach, shovel, God forgive my silence, mixing with my mother's panicked scream. I flew down the stairs, my mind conjuring a dozen terrible scenarios. Had my father finally snapped? Had he hurt my mother or my brother? I burst into the living room, ready for a fight, my body coiled like a spring. But the scene I found was not one of violence, but of chaos. My brother, Caleb, was sprawled on the floor, not injured, but surrounded by the contents of a large, overturned cardboard box. My mother wasn't screaming because he was hurt. She was staring wild-eyed at the mess on the floor as if she had just seen a ghost. The box was old and dusty, clearly dragged out of the garage in Caleb's frantic search for his belongings. I tripped, he grumbled, pushing himself up and brushing dust off his expensive jeans. This house is a death trap. But my eyes weren't on him. They were fixed on the scattered junk on the floor, old yearbooks, dusty trophies, and something that glinted under the dim light of the hallway lamp. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, lying half hidden under one of my father's old varsity jackets. It was delicate and old-fashioned, completely out of place amongst the masculine clutter of the box. As I bent down to get a closer look, my mother seemed to break from her trance. "Don't touch that," she shrieked, scrambling towards it. "It's just old junk." But her desperation only fueled my curiosity. I was faster. I snatched the locket from the floor an instant before her fingers could close around it. It felt unnaturally cold in my hand. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was important. My mother stood panting, her face a mask of fear, pleading with her eyes for me to put it down. I ignored her. With a trembling thumb, I clicked open the tiny clasp. On one side, protected by a small, cracked piece of plastic, was the faded photograph of a young woman with a kind smile and dark, sad eyes. I had never seen her before in my life. On the other side, a few words were delicately engraved, but they were too tarnished to read clearly. Just then, my father stormed into the room, his face red with exertion from carrying heavy boxes. "What is all the yelling about?" he bellowed. Then he saw it. His eyes locked onto the open locket in my hand, and a frightening transformation took place. His irritation vanished, replaced by a dark, primal fury unlike anything I had ever seen from him. It was a rage that went beyond the loss of a house or an inheritance. "Where?" he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Did you get that?" Suddenly, all the pieces began to click into place in my mind, forming a picture I didn't want to see. The cryptic journal entry. The garage. The story of bleach and a hidden shovel. And now this locket, containing the face of a forgotten woman, which provoked a level of terror and rage in my parents that nothing else had. The simple, ugly story of my family's neglect was dissolving, revealing the faint outline of something far more sinister underneath it. Who was this woman, and what happened to her that my parents were so desperate to keep buried? My mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Her voice dropped to a frantic, terrified whisper. "Rowan, please. For your own good, put it down and walk away. There are things about this family, about your father's past, that you are better off not knowing. Some doors should never be opened." The threat wasn't for my safety. It was a desperate plea for her own. She was terrified of what would happen if I kept digging. And that's the terrible choice, isn't it? When you suspect a dark truth, do you pursue it, or do you let it lie? What would you do? I looked from my mother's terrified face to my father's murderous one. They thought their threats and their fear could still control me. But they had created this moment. Their cruelty, their ultimatum, had forced me to find the will. The will had led me to the journal. And the journal had led me here, to this locket. I was no longer just fighting for my home. I was fighting for a truth that had been silenced for 20 years. A truth this unknown woman deserved. I closed my fingers around the locket, the cold metal a small, solid anchor in a sea of terrifying uncertainty. I looked directly at my father, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. "I think it's a little late for secrets, don't you?" The standoff was absolute, the air thick with unspoken threats. Just then, headlights washed through the living room window, and a car horn blared from the driveway. Caleb had called a taxi. "That's me. I'm out of here," he announced, grabbing his bags and practically running for the door, desperate to escape the toxic storm he had helped create. My father broke his furious gaze from me and looked at my mother. "Susan, get the rest of our things. We're leaving. Now." They were running. They weren't just leaving the house. They were trying to escape the questions I now held in my hand. They were abandoning their 24-hour deadline to flee from a ghost. As my mother rushed to obey, I held the locket up to the light one last time, tilting it until the tarnished engraving became clear. It was a single name, Eleanor. The name hung in the air between us, Eleanor. It was a key, and I could see in my father's eyes that it unlocked a door he had sealed shut 20 years ago. The chaotic scramble to leave became a frantic escape. My brother was already gone. My father, Mark, stopped at the front door, a half-packed box in his arms. He didn't look at me with anger anymore. He looked at me with something that looked terrifyingly like hatred. "You have no idea what you've just done," he whispered, his voice low and menacing. "You should have left it buried." My mother, Susan, hurried past him, pausing only to grab my arm. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a fear I had never seen before. "He's right, Rowan. Please," she begged in a desperate whisper. "Stop now, before you find something you can't unfind." And with that final chilling warning, they were gone. I watched from the doorway as their car sped down the street and disappeared around the corner, leaving me utterly alone in the sudden, deafening silence of the house. The silence was a physical thing. It pressed in on me from all sides. The half-empty rooms, littered with the debris of their hasty departure, felt like a museum of a life that had been a lie. Just an hour ago, my victory had felt so clear, so triumphant. I had won my home and my freedom. But now, holding the cold weight of the locket, that victory felt hollow. The house was no longer a prize. It was a crime scene. And the name Eleanor echoed in every empty room. I knew I couldn't stop. I had to know who she was. My grandmother's journal entry pointed the way. The garage. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my feet felt like they were moving on their own. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer, its beam cutting a nervous path through the darkened house. I have to ask you all a question, and I want you to be honest in the comments. Would you go into a dark, creepy garage at night, knowing it might be connected to a dark family secret? Because I can tell you, if I wasn't running on pure adrenaline, I might still be standing frozen in that kitchen. I opened the door to the garage and was hit with a wave of cold, musty air that smelled of gasoline, dust, and something else. Something that smelled like old secrets. I flicked on the single bare light bulb, which cast long, dancing shadows across the cluttered space. Old furniture was draped in white sheets, looking like a gathering of ghosts. Piles of my father's forgotten projects and my brother's old sports equipment were stacked to the ceiling. It was a tomb of forgotten things, and I was about to start digging for bones. As my flashlight beam scanned the cluttered corners, a memory surfaced. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I'd tried to come in here to find my bike. My father had caught me at the door and yelled at me with a panic that was far more intense than my small mistake deserved. The garage is off limits, Rowan. It's dangerous in here, he had shouted. It wasn't the anger of a parent worried about safety. It was the fear of a man guarding a secret. The secret of this very room. My hands were trembling as I navigated the maze of junk, my grandmother's words guiding me. Behind the old paint cans. I found them in the back corner, a stack of rusted metal cans that probably hadn't been moved in decades. I squeezed behind them, my flashlight beam pointed at the grimy wall. There was no muddy shovel. My heart sank for a second, but then my light caught the edge of something else, wedged deep in the space between the wall and a stack of old tires. A small, metal box, sealed shut with rust. With a grunt, I pulled it free. It was heavier than it looked. It wasn't locked. The clasp was just rusted tight. I forced it open with a loud, groaning crack. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, were the remnants of a life. A single, tarnished silver earring. A dried, pressed gardenia that had long since lost its scent. And a small bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Beneath them, I saw a plastic laminated university ID card. My breath caught in my throat. The picture showed the smiling, dark-eyed woman from the locket. The name was printed clearly, Eleanor Vance. Student ID number 7742. Enrollment year, 2004. My hands shook so badly I could barely untie the faded ribbon on the letters. I unfolded the one on top. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was my father's, from a time when it was younger, more hopeful. It was a love letter, full of poetic promises and secret dreams. My eyes scanned the page, my mind reeling, until I landed on the final, devastating paragraph. The words that changed everything. "Don't you worry about Susan," he wrote. "She'll never have to know about us, or about our future. I'll take care of everything before the baby arrives. I promise you, Eleanor. We'll be a proper family soon." A baby. Eleanor was pregnant. The secret I had unearthed wasn't just a betrayal. It was a whole phantom family, a life my father had planned to build on the ashes of his first one. And a terrifying, unspoken question now screamed in the silence of that garage. What happened to the baby? The word baby echoed in the cold, dusty air of the garage, and everything changed. The sinister secret I had unearthed wasn't just about a hidden affair or a forgotten woman anymore. It was about a child. A potential brother or sister I never knew. A life that was promised in a letter and then seemingly erased from existence. I slammed the lid of the rusted box shut, a sudden, irrational fear washing over me, as if the ghosts of this garage were about to reach out and pull me into the darkness with them. I scrambled out, back into the house, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. I couldn't sleep that night. How could I? I locked myself in my grandmother's bedroom, the metal box on the floor beside me like a ticking bomb. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent a jolt of fear through me. The victory I had felt just hours before, the triumph of reclaiming my home, now felt like a cruel joke. I hadn't won a home. I had inherited a tomb, a house built on a foundation of terrible secrets. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with unspoken questions. What happened to Eleanor? And what did my father do? The sun rose on my first official day as the sole occupant of 128 Oak Street. The morning light did little to chase away the shadows in my mind. The adrenaline from the previous night had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a heavy, suffocating dread. The house was a mess, a chaotic landscape of half-empty rooms and discarded memories from my family's frantic escape. For a moment, I felt completely overwhelmed, a small boat in a vast, dark ocean. But then my eyes landed on the metal box, on the university ID with Eleanor's smiling face. I couldn't ignore this. I had to know. My first thought was the police, but I shut it down immediately. What could I tell them? That my father had an affair 20 years ago and I found a cryptic journal entry? They would dismiss me in a heartbeat. I had no proof of any crime, just a collection of old painful memories that painted a terrible picture. I needed more. I needed facts. I had a name, Eleanor Vance. I had a place, the university printed on her ID card. It was a long shot, a faint trail that had gone cold 2 decades ago, but it was the only path I had. Looking at Eleanor's young, hopeful face on the ID card, I felt a huge weight of responsibility. It's a strange and terrifying position to be in. I have to ask you, if you were in my shoes, what would your very first move be? Would you try to find old university records? Search online for her name? Or maybe try to find her family? I feel like I'm walking through a minefield, so I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. I decided I couldn't move forward without trying to find some anchor from the past. I thought of the one person my grandmother trusted completely. Her lawyer, Mr. Davison. He had handled her affairs for 40 years. If anyone knew anything, it would be him. But I had to be careful. I called his office, my heart pounding. I told him I was just calling to thank him for his help with the will, and that I was beginning the long process of sorting through my grandmother's old things. Then, as casually as I could, I asked, she kept so many records of the family's history. Did she ever mention storing other important family documents with you? There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. When Mr. Davison spoke again, his warm, professional tone had a new, cautious edge to it. Your grandmother was a very wise and protective woman, Rowan, he said carefully. She believed in keeping the past in the past. Just remember that some family histories have chapters that were closed for a very good reason. It wasn't an answer, but it was a clear warning. He knew something. He was telling me to stop digging. His words triggered a memory. I was sitting with Grandma a few months before she passed, and I'd asked her about my grandfather, who died when my dad was just a teenager. A sad, distant look had come over her eyes. Some men leave shadows longer than they are tall, my dear, she had said, her voice barely a whisper. Your father, he has been walking in a very long shadow his whole life. I thought she was talking about grief, about the pain of losing a parent so young. Now, I understood. It wasn't a shadow of grief. It was the shadow of a secret. After the unsettling call, I turned to the one place left, the internet. My hands were shaking as I typed Eleanor Vance, and the name of the university into the search bar. At first, nothing. Just a few common profiles on social media belonging to other women with the same name. My hope began to fade. Then, I had an idea. I added 2 more words to the search, missing, and the year, 2004. I hit enter. My blood ran cold. There was only one result. A link to the digital archives of an old local newspaper. The headline read, "University student vanishes without a trace." I clicked the link. The article was short, a brief, tragic story from a bygone era. Eleanor Vance, a brilliant 21-year-old literature student, had disappeared on the night of October 12, 2004. She was last seen leaving the campus library. Her roommates said she was excited about her future. The article mentioned that, according to her family, Eleanor was a few months pregnant at the time of her disappearance. The police investigation had eventually gone cold. She was never found. The last sentence of the article made the world stop. Police have stated they do not suspect foul play, as Vance had recently ended a relationship with an older married man and may have decided to start a new life elsewhere. The words on the screen burned into my memory. Vanishes without a trace. Pregnant. May have decided to start a new life. I pushed back from the desk, a wave of nausea washing over me. This wasn't just a secret my family had kept. This was a story they had told. The official police theory, the one that had allowed a missing person case to go cold, was that a young, pregnant girl had simply run away. It was the perfect, tragic, no questions asked narrative. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that the author of that convenient story was the older, married man himself. My father. He hadn't just covered his tracks. He had poisoned the well. He had painted Eleanor as unstable and him as the jilted party, a respectable family man who had made a small mistake. He had used her memory to protect his own reputation. The anger that began to build in my chest was a cold, hard fire. This was no longer just about finding out what happened to Eleanor and her baby. It was about dismantling the web of lies my father had spun to escape justice, a web that had trapped Eleanor's memory in disgrace for 20 long years. My quest for answers now had a new, urgent focus. The house, which had felt menacing just hours before, now felt like an archive, a library of secrets waiting to be read. I had to find proof, something tangible that connected my father not just to Eleanor, but to her disappearance. I thought of the one room in the house that was exclusively his domain, a place I was rarely allowed to enter as a child, his study. If there was evidence of his dark past, it would be hidden there, amongst the records of his perfect life. The study was exactly as he'd left it, organized, spotless, and impersonal. A large oak desk stood against one wall, a monument to the man he pretended to be. It felt like a violation, going through his private things, but the time for respecting his privacy was long gone. I started with his desk drawers, finding nothing but old pens and company letterhead. I moved to the large filing cabinet, my fingers scanning the labels, taxes, mortgage, insurance. Everything was a testament to his carefully constructed life. I was looking for a crack in the facade. As I pulled open a heavy-bottom drawer, a memory, sharp and sudden, came flooding back. I was about 8 years old, and I'd run into the study to show him a drawing I'd made. He was on the phone, his back to me, his voice a low, angry hiss. "It's handled," he'd said. "Forget it ever happened. No one will ever know." He hung up and turned, and his face, which had been a mask of cold fury, instantly softened into a fake smile when he saw me. "Don't you worry your pretty little head," he'd said, patting my hair. What had he handled? In the very back of the filing cabinet, I found what I was looking for, a dusty box labeled Old Financials. I pulled it out and sat on the floor, my heart pounding as I lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of old checkbook registers. I found the one for 2004 and began frantically flipping through the pages, scanning the dates. October 10th. October 11th. Then, there it was. An entry from October 14th, 2 days after Eleanor was last seen. It was a cash withdrawal for $10,000, a huge amount of money back then. And on the memo line, my father had written a single chilling word, Settlement. A settlement? That wasn't a word for groceries or a mortgage payment. It's a word used to end a dispute, to buy silence, to make a problem go away. This is where the story takes a very dark turn, and I need to know what you're thinking. What does a $10,000 cash payment labeled settlement 2 days after a pregnant woman disappears mean to you? Share your theories, because I'm not sure I want to believe what my own mind is telling me. This was a major clue, but it was also a dead end. A cash withdrawal is untraceable. It didn't tell me who he paid or why. I kept digging through the box, a desperate hope fueling my search. At the very bottom, beneath the checkbooks, was an old leather-bound day planner from 2004. I opened it, my fingers tracing the entries for that fateful week in October. Monday, dentist. Tuesday, Caleb's game. The day Eleanor disappeared was completely blank. But the next day, Wednesday, October 13th, had an entry that made my breath catch in my throat. It was an appointment, scrawled in my father's hurried handwriting. It wasn't a name I recognized. It just said, 2 p.m. L. Davison, followed by a phone number. Davison. The same last name as my grandmother's trusted lawyer. The man who had just warned me to let the past stay in the past. Was this a relative? Or was it the man himself, 20 years younger? My mind reeled. Had Mr. Davison, the man my grandmother trusted with her life, been involved in this cover-up from the very beginning? The name, the warning on the phone, the appointment on the day after Eleanor vanished, it couldn't be a coincidence. My father hadn't just been a cheat. He had an advisor, maybe even an accomplice. The web was wider and more tangled than I ever could have imagined. I stared at the old phone number written in the planner. It was a long shot, but it was a lead. My hand was shaking as I pulled out my cell phone and punched in the numbers, my thumb hovering over the call button. Who would be on the other end of this line? A law firm? A disconnected number? Or the man who held the key to this entire nightmare? I took a deep breath and pressed send. My thumb hovered over the call button, a tiny green icon that felt like a doorway to a dangerous, unknown world. I could still turn back, throw the planner in a box, and pretend I never saw the name. But I couldn't. Eleanor's smiling face from the student ID flashed in my mind. She deserved a voice. I took a shaky breath and pressed the button. The phone began to ring, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead quiet study. 1 ring. 2. 3. My hope began to fade. It was a 20-year-old number, after all. I was about to hang up when the ringing stopped. A crisp, professional voice answered. Davison Law. How may I direct your call? My heart leaped into my throat. It was the same firm. The same man. I asked for Mr. Davison, my voice sounding strangely calm. A moment later, his familiar, fatherly voice came on the line. Rowan. Is everything all right? He sounded so normal, so concerned. It almost made me doubt myself. But the image of the planner, the date, and the settlement check burned in my mind. I took a deep breath and jumped into the fire. Mr. Davison, I said, my voice cold and level. I'm calling about a matter from October of 2004. It concerns a young woman named Eleanor Vance and a $10,000 cash settlement. The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest sound I have ever heard. It stretched for 5, then 10, agonizing seconds. It was a silence that was full of guilt, a silence that was a confession in itself. When he finally spoke, the warm, friendly lawyer was gone. In his place was a cold, hard stranger. I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, he said, his voice a flat, chilling monotone. And I would advise you to stop digging into things that do not concern you. Do not call this number again. He hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, but he had told me everything I needed to know. He was involved. The man my grandmother had trusted for 40 years, the man who had helped her draft the very will that was meant to protect me, had helped my father cover up the disappearance of a pregnant 21-year-old girl. The betrayal was so immense, so profound, it left me feeling breathless. I was completely on my own now, an enemy to the very people I was supposed to be able to trust. This is the point of no return, isn't it? That moment you realize you've poked a monster and there's no going back, only forward into the dark. Have you ever felt that? A moment where you were in way over your head but knew that stopping was no longer an option? I'd be fascinated to hear what gives you the courage to keep going in moments like that. For me, it was the thought of Eleanor, a girl my age whose whole life had been erased. I knew Mr. Davison would never talk. He had too much to lose. My only hope, as it had been from the start, was my grandmother. I walked out of the study and into the living room, picking up her leather-bound journal from the coffee table. She had left me the will to protect me and the journal to guide me. There had to be something else. There had to be a final clue I had missed. I sat down, the journal in my lap, and just held it, trying to feel some connection to her strength. My mind drifted back to a lazy Sunday afternoon years ago. Grandma Evelyn was teaching me how to do the big, complicated crossword puzzle from the newspaper. I was stuck on a clue. "I don't get it," I'd complained. "There's no answer." She had smiled and tapped the page with her finger. "The answer is almost always right in front of you, my dear," she'd said. "You just have to learn how to see the clues in a different way." Her words echoed in my mind now. I was looking at the journal as a book, but maybe I needed to look at it as an object. Heeding the memory, I began to examine the journal itself. I ran my fingers over the worn leather cover, the creased spine. It felt normal. But then, I opened it and felt the inside of the back cover. The paper lining was thick, but I could feel a slight bulge underneath, something flat and hard. My heart began to race. With trembling fingers, I took a small letter opener from the desk and carefully sliced the paper lining open. Tucked inside, in a hidden compartment, was a small, flat, silver key. It was a key to a safe deposit box. A small metal tag was attached to the key ring, and engraved on it was a single number, 317. This was it. This was the final piece of her puzzle. The will was my shield. The journal was my sword. And this key was the truth. It would lead to the one thing my father and Mr. Davison couldn't deny, the proof that had been kept safe and silent for 20 long years. For the first time since this nightmare began, a wave of real hope washed over me. I was close. I held the small key in the palm of my hand, my mind reeling with the possibilities of what it could unlock. Evidence. Letters. Something that would finally tell the story of what happened to Eleanor Vance. My victory felt so close I could almost taste it. But as I stood up, my eyes were drawn to the large window that looked out onto the dark, quiet street. A black, unfamiliar car was parked across the road under a flickering streetlight. It was just sitting there, a silent predator in the suburban night. As I watched, a tiny red light glowed from the driver's side window, the telltale sign of a cigarette being lit. I wasn't alone. I was being watched. The tiny silver key fell from my hand, clattering softly on the old wooden floor. All the air seemed to rush out of the room. The hope I had felt just a second ago was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fear. I dropped to the floor and scrambled backwards, away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't a coincidence. The phone call to Mr. Davison hadn't just been a dead end, it had been a tripwire. I had alerted the monster that I was coming, and now it was sitting outside my door, watching me. I spent the rest of the night a prisoner in my own home. I turned off every light in the house and crept from window to window, peeking through the blinds like a ghost. The black car never moved. It just sat there under the moonlight, a silent promise of violence. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind in the trees, was the sound of them coming for me. The house, my grandmother's fortress, now felt like a glass cage. I was the animal, and the hunters were waiting patiently for their moment to strike. What had my father done that was worth this? What secret was so terrible they would go to these lengths to protect it? When the first light of dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of gray and purple, the car was gone. For a moment, A wave of relief washed over me. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a neighbor. But I knew that was a lie I desperately wanted to believe. They hadn't left. They had simply retreated with the shadows. They wanted me to see them. It was a warning shot, a clear message. Stop digging. But they didn't know me. They didn't know that their threat was like gasoline on a fire. I had to get to that safe deposit box, and I had to do it today. But how? I couldn't just walk out the front door and drive to the bank. They would be watching. They would follow me. For all I knew, they could be listening to my phone calls. I had the key to everything, but it was useless if I couldn't get to the lock. I sat in the silent kitchen, the little silver key clutched in my hand, my mind racing. I needed a plan, a way to move without being seen. I had to think like my grandmother, who had planned for this moment 20 years in advance. This is where I could really use your help. Let's do a strategy session in the comments. If you knew without a doubt that someone was watching your house, how would you sneak out to a location 10 blocks away without being followed? I'm talking full-on spy movie tactics here. What's your escape plan? I need every clever, brilliant, and crazy idea you've got, because my life might depend on it. Here's what I came up with. I found my grandmother's old, oversized coat in the hall closet, along with a patterned headscarf and a pair of large, dark sunglasses. It wasn't a perfect disguise, but it would have to do. Then, I called the same local taxi company my brother had used and requested a car to my front door in exactly 30 minutes. That was the decoy. My real plan was much older. A secret from my childhood. I remembered playing hide and seek in this house with Grandma Evelyn when I was a little girl. She had laughed and shown me all the best secret spots. And her favorite was a loose board at the very back of the garden fence, hidden behind a thick lilac bush. It was our secret escape route into the neighbor's yard. Always have a way out that they don't know about, my dear, she had told me with a mischievous wink. A childhood game was about to become my lifeline. I waited, my heart pounding, peeking through the living room blinds. The taxi pulled up right on time. And just as it did, the same black car from last night turned the corner and slowed to a stop a few houses down, partially hidden by a large oak tree. They were here. They were watching. My diversion had worked. Taking my chance, I slipped out the back door, slid through the loose fence panel, and scurried through my neighbor's yard, my feet silent on the damp grass. I was out. And they had no idea. The 10-block walk to the bank was the longest of my life. Every person I passed was a potential threat. Every car that slowed down sent a jolt of panic through me. I finally reached the formidable stone building of the First National Bank of Northwood. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely sign my name on the entry log. I showed the clerk the key. He led me through a heavy, circular vault door into a cold, silent room lined with thousands of metal boxes. He located number 317, slid the long, thin box out, and handed it to me before leaving me alone in a small, private viewing booth. This was it. The final secret. The truth my grandmother had hidden away for 2 decades. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I took a deep breath, placed the key in the lock, and turned. With a soft click, the box opened. I lifted the heavy metal lid, expecting to find a stack of documents, a weapon, or maybe even Eleanor's diary. But the box was nearly empty. Inside, there was only one thing. A single, small, black videotape. A Betamax cassette. On the white sticky label, my grandmother's familiar handwriting had written 3 words. Play me. For Eleanor. I stared at the black plastic rectangle in my hands. A Betamax tape. My heart, which had been racing with victory, sank into a pit of despair. In a world of digital files and streaming, this was an ancient relic, a fossil from a forgotten time. The final undeniable proof my grandmother had left me was written in a language no one spoke anymore. The Watchers, my father, his lawyer, they didn't need to stop me. Technology had already done it for them. How on earth was I going to watch this? I knew I couldn't take it to a professional video conversion shop. It was too risky. A place like that could be owned by a friend of Mr. Davison. The tape could be accidentally lost or erased. No, my grandmother had trusted me with this secret, and I would be the only one to see it through. I had to find a Betamax player myself. My mind raced through the possibilities. Where would a 40-year-old piece of technology be hiding? A thrift store? A museum? And then it hit me. The town library. A place of knowledge, of history, and of old, forgotten equipment. The library was quiet and smelled of old paper and peace. It felt like a sanctuary after the fear and paranoia of the last few days. The head librarian, Mrs. Gable, was a kind woman with silver hair who remembered me and my grandmother coming in every Saturday for years. When I asked her if they might have an old Betamax player in storage, her eyes lit up. "What a wonderful piece of history," she said. She led me to a dusty back room, and there it was, a heavy, clunky machine that looked like a small tank. She helped me set it up in a private study corral with a small, old television. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely slide the cassette into the machine. This was it. 20 years of silence, 20 years of secrets, were all locked inside this little black tape. What was I about to see? A confession. A crime. What horror had my grandmother felt was so important to record? I took a deep breath, the kind you take before you dive into deep, cold water, and I pressed the play button. The machine whirred loudly, and the dark screen flickered to life with a wave of static. The image was grainy and the color was faded, but it was unmistakable. It was the garage of my house, but it was cleaner, more organized. A much younger, healthier Grandma Evelyn was holding the camera, her voice cheerful. And sitting in a chair, laughing, was Eleanor Vance. She was beautiful, vibrant, and very, very pregnant. This wasn't a video of a crime. It was a video of two friends, two allies. My grandmother wasn't afraid of Eleanor. She was trying to help her. On the tape, Eleanor's laughter turned to tears, but they were tears of relief. "I'm so glad you understand, Evelyn," she said to my grandmother. "Mark. He's not the man I thought he was. He's become so angry, so controlling." Eleanor then confessed the most shocking secret of all. My mother, Susan, had secretly met with her a week earlier. She had given Eleanor all of her personal savings and begged her to leave town, to save herself and her unborn child from my father's unpredictable temper. My mother wasn't an accomplice to a crime. She was the first person who tried to stop one. The video continued. My grandmother was recording this so Eleanor would have proof of her plans, proof that she was leaving on her own terms. "I'm leaving tonight," Eleanor said, wiping a tear from her eye. "I'll be safe." Just as she said it, the sound of a car door slamming shut echoed from outside the garage. The camera shook. My father's voice, young and furious, yelled, "Eleanor, what is she doing here?" The camera dropped to the floor, now pointing at the dusty concrete. I could hear a struggle, a chair scraping, Eleanor screaming my father's name. And then, a sickening thud. And then, silence. The tape kept recording the silent, empty garage for another minute before it cut to black. I sat in that small library room, the screen now just static, as silent tears streamed down my face. My grandmother hadn't recorded a murder. She had recorded the moments right before one. It was proof that my father had lied to the police. It was proof that he was the last person to see Eleanor alive. And it was proof that their last moments together were violent. I finally had him. I had them all. I walked out of the library, the tape clutched in my hand, and I didn't call the local police. I called the state police. A few weeks have passed. My father and Mr. Davison have both been arrested. The tape was the key that unlocked the entire cold case. Faced with the evidence, my father's web of lies completely unraveled. The investigation into Eleanor's disappearance is now a homicide case, and for the first time in 20 years, she and her baby have a chance at real justice. My mother and I are talking again, trying to heal the wounds that my father's darkness inflicted on us all. The house is finally quiet. It's my home now, a place where the truth finally came to light. This whole journey started with a key to a house, but my grandmother really left me a key to the truth. And in finding it, I found my own strength. Your support and comments on this journey have meant the world to me. If this story of finding a voice for the voiceless and justice for the forgotten has touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more stories of truth and empowerment. Thank you for watching and for being a part of this. You are all amazing.